Is Matt McMahon on the hot seat? Let's talk about it. Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt McMahon. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. LSU Baseball scrimmaged over the weekend. Give you some takeaways from that. But I want to start today in a spot where I don't think we've started a podcast at all. I resumed Locked on LSU back in June, and I don't know that we have led a podcast with LSU men's basketball since I've taken over taken the show back over. We're going to do that today, though, because of what happened this weekend. LSU lost Ole Miss 72-70, and another LSU basketball loss isn't in and of itself something that would warrant a lot of attention. Tigers are 1-9 in the conference. They're 12-11 overall. Under Matt McMahon, they've been really bad. They were 2-16 in the league in year one. They were 9-9 a year ago. And as they sit presently, they are 1-9 in the conference. So they've not really been very good under Matt McMahon. 12-30 in the league, 43-42 overall. So a loss wouldn't necessarily be the thing that would get a lot of people's attention. But the nature of this loss is why it has many LSU fans talking. If you didn't watch the game, good for you. Tigers were hosting Ole Miss, a ranked team. And LSU played really well. Tigers led by 6 at halftime, 39-33. All the things that had kind of plagued this team went their way. Tigers were 44% from the field. They were 33% from three. They out-rebounded Ole Miss 40-39. Turnovers were a problem, but not as big a problem as they had been, just 10 turnovers. And Tigers really were able to match Ole Miss in the paint. 30-28 was the points in the paint. And with under 3 minutes to play, LSU led by 11. And you know that little thing at ESPN.com where it's like the win probability graph and it's got the little squiggly lines? Well, when LSU was up 11 with under 3 to play, LSU had a 98% probability of winning that game. Ranked team at the Maravich Center. You outplayed them. You're up 11 with under 3 to play. You gotta get across the finish line. You gotta land the plane. You gotta get the ship to the dock. I mean, you gotta finish. And LSU instead was outscored 13-0 down the stretch. Ole Miss with the tip in at the buzzer to win the game, and the Tigers lose 72-70. And for the first time this basketball season, I have seen a reaction from LSU fans, because here's the reality with LSU basketball fans. LSU basketball fans are there is either elation or there is apathy. There's no in between. If LSU's good, people are really excited. If LSU's bad, people disengage and they say, when's baseball? And that's kind of how it's always been. LSU basketball has had some super high highs. Pete Maravich, Shaq, Bob Pettit, Final Four in 2006. But they've had some horrendous lows as well. Year one under Matt McMahon. It's a 2-win team in the SEC. So when LSU started on this losing streak, that they've been on, most people just disengaged. And there was a lot of reason for optimism in the pre-conference. Nice win at Kansas State. You beat UCF. Had a nice double-digit win over Florida State at the Maravich Center. It was a team that was trending toward, if you can go 500 in the league, you'd be a tournament team. And instead, what has happened is they lost 3 out the chute to start conference play, beat Arkansas, and now have lost 6 in a row, so they're 1-9. You've got 3 games ahead in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and South Carolina that are winnable. I'm not saying you're going to win them. I'm just saying they're gettable because your final 5 are not. Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. You're going to go on a 5-game losing streak to finish the season. But the real question now, I think, is where does that leave Matt McMahon? And we have to have this conversation now. If you're familiar with anything that I've done over the years, I am not a fire the coach guy. I'm not going to pound the table and yell, you got to fire him now, or her. I'll give you an opinion where I think if that coach is capable of winning at the highest level of expectation. And I think for the first time since Matt McMahon has been the coach, we need to start having that conversation about him. So let me build up to this point and then give you my opinion on where this goes. Because what I feel is going to happen, what I think should happen, are probably different things. When Matt McMahon took the LSU job, and this is important, context matters a lot in this situation. When Matt McMahon took the LSU job, remember, Will Wade had been fired, and LSU had not yet gotten a final rule on sanctions from the NCAA. There was the possibility of scholarship restrictions. There was the possibility of a postseason ban. We didn't know what the sanctions were going to be. All we knew is the NCAA wanted their pound of flesh with Will Wade. They weren't going to stop until they got it. And so LSU's brass, Scott Woodward, acquiesced in large part to protect the football program because the NCAA was holding the football investigation open long after it should have been closed as leverage to make sure they got their pound of flesh with Will Wade. The whole Our Lady of the Lake thing with the football program, the NCAA would not close the book on that because if you have level 1 violations in multiple sports simultaneously, then they can get you for the dreaded lack of institutional control. And LSU could not risk, they were not going to risk football to save Will Wade's job in basketball. You couldn't. The NCAA knew that. They used it as leverage. And so ultimately they got what they wanted, which was Will Wade fired. And so when Scott Woodward went to go hire a coach, he's hiring a coach in a situation where you literally don't know what's going to happen. Are you going to have a full slate of scholarships? Is there going to be a postseason ban? Why would anybody take that job? They wouldn't. And so your pool of candidates was limited. So you had to go overpromise that candidate, which is what they did with Matt McMahon, who was coming off a great season at Murray State. His final season at Murray State, they won their league. They were 31-3, 18-0 in the conference, made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Matt McMahon, when they hired him from Murray State, won a hair under 70% of his games at Murray State and 75% of his league games. They made it to the NCAA tournament 3 times. So in order to get a coach like that, you had to overpromise. And so they gave him a 7-year deal. And if sanctions came, it would have automatically added an 8th year that averaged out at $2.9 million per year. They had to, the only way you were going to get any quality coach was by giving them that type of contract and saying, we're investing in you for the long haul. And that's important context to remember because I think that is going to shape the decision that's ahead for Scott Woodward and LSU basketball. Let me step aside briefly. I'll come back and I'll tell you what I think they should do and what I think they're going to do. It's Locked On LSU, your team every day. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether backing your team for a late game rally, picking a player to hit a clutch three. You never feel like you're missing your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, so now that we remember the context of how LSU was able to hire Matt McMahon, remember that contract. They gave him a 7-year contract, averaging out at $2.9 million per year. So year 1 under Matt McMahon is a total disaster. Remember, he takes the job. Within 2 weeks, the entire scholarship roster is gone. Literally 0 scholarship players on roster within the first 2 weeks of him taking the job. I've said it often, and it would be hypocritical of me to reverse course now. Year 1 was a total punt. You do not judge Matt McMahon based on that first year. He inherited an impossible situation. It was just a get through it. I said it at the time. It would be hypocritical of me to turn on that now. Year 1, total punt. Year 2, you wanted to see progress, and you did. They went 17-16 overall. They went 9-9 in the conference and made the NIT. The problem is Matt McMahon himself has said over and over again he didn't come to LSU to make the NIT. The expectation was to make the NCAA tournament and make LSU a nationally relevant program. They have not done that. But on the backs of that season a year ago, where you saw progress, LSU effectively doubled its NIL budget from year to year. This roster currently at LSU is as I've been told, is north of $2 million. They've got an NIL in this roster. Here's the problem. When you look at Kentucky and Alabama and Auburn and the top teams in this league, how Tennessee and Florida and even Vanderbilt, programs like that are doing, the top of this league is spending $8 to $10 million on their roster. You cannot compete if you're going to spend north of $2 million. And that's double what you spent a year ago. This is literally the deepest league in the history of college basketball. A week ago, the SEC had 10 ranked teams. 10 of the top 25 were from the SEC. Now listen, I don't want to go any further without saying this. I am not absolving Matt McMahon of wrongdoing. I could certainly make a case that you do not have the resources. You have not invested the resources in this program to be able to compete at the highest level. That is a fact. Any coach, it doesn't matter who the coach is, you will not be able to compete when the SEC has $8 to $10 million rosters and you're spending $2 million. You cannot compete. So when LSU goes and loses at Alabama or loses to Auburn, loses games to the upper ilk of the league, okay, that's what's going to happen when you're playing better teams in the conference. But when you play an unranked Texas team and lose by 31 at home, the largest home loss to an unranked opponent since 1966, that's inexcusable. That's a coach who did not have his players ready to play. And when you play Ole Miss at home, a ranked Ole Miss team, and you're up 11 points with under 3 minutes to play, and you gag away that lead and lose that game, that is squarely on coaching, nowhere else. And I understand you could say players got to play, but it is on coaches to make sure that fundamentally you know how to land the plane. When you're up 11 points at home with under 3 minutes to play, you have got to finish. That is clock management. That is ball control. That is easy shots. That is converting at the free throw line. Those are end game situations that you have got to be proficient in to get that win. And when you don't, that is squarely on coaching, and that is Matt McMahon. Period. Now, I just ran through his record. This is a dude that won 75% of his league games at Murray State, 70% of his games overall. He didn't forget how to coach. Matt McMahon is a good basketball coach who has had a couple of awful outings in the past few weeks, the Texas game and the Ole Miss game notably. But you don't absolve him of wrongdoing in those games. So rightfully, people are asking, is he on the hot seat? Should he be? Well, here's the problem you have. If LSU were going to fire Matt McMahon, they would owe him $7.5 million. If you waited another year, you'd owe him 6.1. After that, it's 4.65 and then 3.15. And before you throw your hands in the air and say, why are you giving these coaches awful contracts? Do you want to be good? Do you want to be good? That's what it takes. That's what it takes to lure a great coach away from the situation they were in, to take your bad job. And LSU, when Matt McMahon was hired, was a bad job. Now, that doesn't mean Scott Woodward hit on the hire, because as of right now, it looks like he didn't. But here's your conundrum, okay? If you agree with me and year one was a punt, then really this is like year two. You went NIT and now you face plant. Should he get a year three? Yes. In essence, really a year four. But if we're agreeing year one was a punt, should he get another year? Yes. Here's the real problem, though. I don't care if it's Matt McMahon, if it's Mike Krzyzewski, if it's Dale Brown, if it's Bobby Knight, if it's John Wooden reincarnate. You are not winning in this league when you are not willing to invest the resources in your program that the top of the league is investing. So here's your question. Okay, you've got a basketball team that's spending north of $2 million in NIL. And that was double from the year before. Do you really think the best use of funds is to cobble together $7.5 million to buy out Matt McMahon? And then even more money to buy out his staff? And then even more money to go hire a new coach? And then you have to go into the NIL era? Where is this money going to come from? Like, if money weren't an issue, I'd be on board with you, because the Texas and Ole Miss losses are inexcusable. It's still Matt McMahon who put together this roster. It's still he who coaches this roster, this team. And it's his fault that they were embarrassed at home against Texas and got and dissolved in a late game scenario against Ole Miss. Like, that's non-negotiable. It's on him. And those are games where you look and go, I don't know if he can ever get this back, because he's lost his team. But if you have a finite amount of if money was no issue, yeah, okay. Move on, hire somebody better, somebody more proven at the Power 5 level. But resources are finite, and that's the problem here. If you can cobble together $7 million to buy out Matt McMahon, I would argue take that $7 million, invest it in a roster, and let this man coach a roster that's capable of going and competing with the top teams in the league. But if you're not going to do that, then it doesn't matter if it's Matt McMahon or anybody you go hire, because they're going to be disadvantaged every single game they go into because you don't have a good enough roster. So I think my answer is in the context of the time, which is that I think Matt McMahon's a good coach. I think he's got a nearly impossible situation because he has a dramatically inferior roster in the NIL era where he cannot compete with the top of this league. And in situations where he has his team playing well and have a chance to win a game and they lose, it's magnified because of all the other losses. If LSU had blown that lead against Ole Miss, but they were hovering around 500 in conference play, we're not having the melt we are right now. The melt we're having is because you're sitting there at 1-9 in the league. You and South Carolina are the worst teams in the conference. And looking around going, you're paying your coach almost $3 million. You got over $2 million in NIL invested in this roster, and that's the result. And I get it. I get it. But what are your options? You fire McMahon and hire someone else just like him to take over a bargain basement program, and you're not going to get any different results. Or you take whatever money you can get and say, we're riding with you, and go invest it into the roster, which I think is the real path forward. Let's see what Matt McMahon can do with a loaded gun. It does not excuse the Texas laws, and it does not excuse collapsing against Ole Miss. But you're looking at a bad situation and saying, how do I make a bad situation manageable to good? How do I start to progress? And I don't think the answer is going to fundraise to buy out Matt McMahon's contract. Because the truth is, so many of LSU's boosters are tired of Scott Woodward knocking on their door to buy out Ed Ogeron, to pay Brian Kelly, to pay Kim Mulkey. Then she wins a championship, you got to give her a raise. To pay Jay Johnson, then he wins a championship, you got to give him a raise. Then you got to give Matt McMahon a 7-year contract. Now you got NIL also. You see the point? It's expensive. When does it stop? Listen, the reality is it's not going to get any better this year for LSU basketball. It's going to get much worse. Like, I think you can beat South Carolina at home. And if that happens, you're a 2-win team in the conference. And that shouldn't be okay with anybody. But I also don't think LSU is in a position financially to be able to buy their way out of this with Matt McMahon. I think what you have to do is commit to Matt McMahon and commit to giving him the best resources possible to see if you can build with him at the helm. The reason you hired him to begin with. But it's not going to get better. You're at Arkansas, you're at Oklahoma, then you're home against South Carolina. And as I said, you're not winning any of your final 5. Florida, Tennessee, at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, Texas A&M. So we'll continue to follow it here. But I'll say this. If you are frustrated with the LSU men's basketball team, if you are feeling some emotion, that's a good thing. Because that's a lot better than apathy, which is what most LSU fans feel about this basketball program most often. Okay, y'all. We are in a game week for LSU baseball. Tigers were scrimmaging this past weekend. Our guy Hunt Palmer from 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge and LouisianaSports.net was out at the box over the weekend and catching the scrimmage on Saturday. Of note, we got to see Chase Shores and William Schmidt pitch for the Tigers on Saturday. Both struggled a bit. Schmidt actually gave up back-to-back homers. They gave up back-to-back homers on Saturday. A wee bit different than what we've come to see. It was interesting also that, as we continue to look at the rotation, it sure seems like Cade Anderson's going to be game 1. Very likely Chase Shores game 2. And maybe, we'll see what they elect to do for the rest of the rotation. But Anthony Ianson very well could be that guy. But over the weekend, it was Anderson Friday, Shores on Saturday. So we'll see how that may go. Schmidt, I mentioned, gave up the back-to-back homers. They were to fellow freshman Derek Curiel and Bear Jones. Schmidt did also get Bear Jones on a looking strike 3 later on in the scrimmage. Jones did homer twice in the scrimmage. Jake Brown homered as well. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the outfield. I think as we look at opening day, there's a few spots that continue to be interesting. Who's going to catch for what it's worth? Hunt noted that the defense behind the plate continues to be a problem. Cade Arambidi, the freshman, has really struggled blocking the ball behind the plate. And these are the best arms that he's ever seen. So when you're up there and you're catching Chase Shores and guys like that, it's going to look a lot different than when you're catching high school arms. But, Aaron Beatty is one to watch behind the dish because he's probably the highest ceiling guy. But if he's not ready defensively to catch in the SEC yet, which direction do you go? That's one worth watching. Left side of the infield, we continue to see Milam at short and Braswell at third. Think that's how it's going to start. But if Milam proves he can't play short at this level, you may see a flip there. And then what are you doing right? It stands to reason that Chris Stanfield, the Auburn transfer, is going to be your center fielder. Derek Curiel, the freshman, is going to be your left fielder. So who's in right? Is it Jake Brown? Is it Josh Pearson? Is it Ashton Larson? Those are going to be your options over the weekend to start in right field, and we'll see what direction that they elect to go out in right field. But man, it was interesting to see a guy like Tanner Reeves, had a nice AB off of Shores. Ethan Fry had a double off the wall in right center. Ashton Larson singled in a 2-strike count off of Chase Shores as well. So we're going to keep an eye on these guys because there's, as talented as they are, there's still incredible talent and opportunity. My guess is, and this is just a guess, my guess is opening night that Jay Johnson will go with the veterans. So that means you would have Josh Pearson starting in right opening night. It may not happen that way. Could certainly be Jake Brown. Ashton Larson has proven he deserves it as well. But Pearson as a senior is probably a guy who makes sense that you would give him the start on opening night. But I think you rotate and see all three guys over the weekend. And then how does that continue to play out after the weekend based on the results they have? So just something worth keeping an eye on here as we are now into game week for LSU baseball as they host Purdue Fort Wayne coming up starting Friday afternoon out at Alec Box Stadium. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, how about you go check out Locked On SEC with our guy, Chris Gordy, available wherever you get podcasts. If you are listening on podcast, thank you so much. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day. For Locked On LSU, your team every day.